and the gentleman from Massachusetts says that he has amendment number 7, and in the list of amendments that we have, the sponsor of number 7 is said to be Mr. Quigley of Illinois. Would the chair be able to explain to me what the rules are in regard to that?
Does the gentleman from Massachusetts state that he is a designee for Mr. Quigley?
Yes, I am offering the amendment as the designee of Mr. Quigley, which I think under the rules is permitted.
To the gentleman from Kentucky, the rule does allow for a designee.
Thank you very much.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman very much. Today, the Republicans continue their war on the environment. This time, we have episode 58 of the Clean Air Act repeal-a-thon. That's right, ladies and gentlemen who are listening. This is the 58th time the Republicans have voted to weaken the Clean Air Act this year. Today's episode guest stars excessive and unwanted appearances by neurotoxic mercury, carcinogenic dioxin, and deadly arsenic. This bill blocks and indefinitely delays implementation of the rules that would reduce emissions of these lethal air pollutants from industrial boilers, and does so in total disregard for the devastating impacts these pollutants have on public health, particularly the health of infants and children. We already know a lot about these substances. For instance, exposure to dioxin causes delays in motor skills and neurodevelopment in children, impacts hormones that regulate growth, metabolism, and reproduction, and has been classified as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization and the National Toxicology Program. Chromium-6 was made famous by the movie Erin Brockovich, starring Julia Roberts. That chemical has been linked to stomach and other forms of cancer. And let's not forget mercury, a substance that is particularly harmful to children because it impairs brain development, impacting memory, attention, and language, and potentially leading to lifelong disabilities. The mercury is released directly into the air we all breathe and finds its way into the food which we eat. In 2010, all 50 states issued fish consumption advisories warning citizens to limit how often they eat fish caught in state waters because of mercury contamination. This bill seeks to permanently eliminate EPA's ability to reduce these toxic emissions from industrial boilers, and does so despite the fact that the American Boiler Manufacturers Association, the association that represents the very companies that design, manufacture, and supply the industrial boilers in question, oppose the Republican bill. That's right, the companies which have stated that they stand ready and able to harness American ingenuity and technological might to design products that comply with EPA requirements in a timely and cost-effective manner, oppose the Republican bill here today. And why? Because they believe this bill will only kill what they expect to be a new high-tech engineering and domestic manufacturing job explosion. So the Republican bill will not only kill people, 6,600 additional deaths per year in the United States, according to the EPA. It will also kill jobs. My amendment is very simple. It just says that the Republican prohibitions on EPA reducing toxic air pollution in this bill are waived if these emissions are found to increase the risk of cancer. This amendment makes the choice very clear. If we adopt this amendment, EPA can continue with its plans to require the dirtiest industrial boilers and incinerators to clean up their cancer-causing emissions, and do so while creating American jobs. So we save 6,600 Americans from dying each year from their exposure to these neurotoxins, and at the same time, we create jobs in our economy. That's what this is all about. The EPA just has to certify that this will not lead, that the Republican approach will not lead to an increase in cancers. That's all that we ask the members on the floor to vote on today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
Our good friend, the gentleman from Massachusetts, talks about the American Boiler Manufacturers Association being opposed to our bill. And that's true. But they don't speak for those who own and operate boilers. They speak for themselves because they manufacture boilers. And if this rule goes into effect, they're going to make a lot more money than they're making today. The gentleman from Massachusetts also indicated that our legislation will weaken the Clean Air Act. There's not anything in our bill that would weaken the Clean Air Act, and I think that Congress has the responsibility to review, to have oversight over the decisions of EPA on regulations that they adopt. And that's precisely why we're here with this legislation, because in our economic situation that we find ourselves in America today is that we have a very high unemployment rate, we have a stagnant economy, we have people without jobs, and we've had a lot of hearings upon this Boiler Act regulation issued by EPA, and people are saying that this regulation alone would put at risk 230,000 jobs nationwide. So we're not saying walk away and not protect the American people. We're simply saying let's hold back for just a moment. Let's go back and revisit this rule. Let's take 15 months for EPA to promulgate a new rule, and then give the affected industries, universities, hospitals, and other groups a minimum of 5 years to implement the new regulations. And I might say that we heard testimony from the University of Notre Dame, because the first Boiler Act rules went into effect in 2004. And in order to meet those regulations, the University of Notre Dame spent $20 million to meet those boiler rules and regulations. And then environmental groups filed a lawsuit and said, hey, this is not stringent enough. We need to issue new rules, which is what EPA did. And so the University of Notre Dame, having spent $20 million already, is still not in compliance. They're going to have to come forth and spend more money, which their witness said that may very well cause them to increase their tuition costs, which makes it more difficult for young people to go to college. So the gentleman from Massachusetts also talked about mercury. And I would reiterate once again that when EPA did their analysis, they did not come up with any health benefits because of the reduction of mercury as a result of their Boiler Act rule. The only health benefits that they pointed out was related to particulate matter, reduction of particulate matter, not mercury. And I am not aware of any scientific causal connection that specifically says that in this instance there's going to be 6,600 more people are going to die each year because we delay the implementation of the Boiler Act rule. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of independent third-party groups have serious questions about EPA's analysis. How do you know for a fact, without any contradiction, that 6,600 people are going to die each year if this is delayed? That there are going to be X thousands of people are going to have heart attacks that wouldn't have had it before? So because of all of those reasons, we simply believe this legislation is a common sense approach, protect jobs, protect the health, revisit the issue, come out with a new rule, give industries, universities, hospitals time to comply. That's all that we're asking for, and for that reason, I would respectfully oppose the gentleman from Massachusetts amendment, which is introduced by Mr. Quigley of Illinois. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek
Strike the
recognition?
last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, we just heard from the author or the chairman of the subcommittee handling this bill two statements that are just absolutely inaccurate. He said this bill does not weaken the Clean Air Act. Well, I don't know what weakening the Clean Air Act means to him, but when we say that we're going to nullify the standards EPA set under the Clean Air Act, that weakens the Clean Air Act. When we say that we're going to eliminate the deadlines for compliance, that weakens the Clean Air Act. When we say that EPA can set regulations, but they have to use a different standard that's weaker, that certainly weakens the Clean Air Act. The other statement that was just made that is absolutely erroneous is that we don't get any health benefits from reducing the toxic pollution. And that is just not true. Reducing the toxic pollutants are aimed at protecting the health from toxic, dangerous, poisonous chemicals, mercury, and carcinogens. These are toxic pollutants, and reducing them will help public health. Again, the statement was made inaccurately that EPA didn't find any health benefits. That is not true. EPA said they could not quantify the health benefits. How do you quantify a life that can be lived longer? How do you quantify a child that will not be impaired in learning and thinking? How do you quantify the damage that can be done from the toxic air pollutants? So I think both of those statements are inaccurate. This amendment says, in effect, that if we're going to have an increase in cancer as a result of what is called by the author of this bill, or the proponents of this bill, common sense approach, that we're not going to let this bill go into effect. I think that's a common sense approach. So I would urge the support for the amendment being offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. I think it's the right approach and underscores the wrong approach taken by the authors of this bill. And I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
And again, the EPA has estimated that delaying the boiler air pollution rules could cause upwards of 6,600 deaths per year. That's the estimate, you know. And so, and that might be lowballing the number, you know. And we all know that parents out there are very concerned about what their kids are breathing in, especially if they live near these kind of facilities that are spewing this stuff up into the atmosphere. They know how kids can be very vulnerable to this going into their systems as they're growing up. And so to say that there's no health effect, that it can't be specifically quantified, that it's 6,602 as opposed to 6,605 doesn't mean that they haven't come up with a number, 6,600, that approximates what could happen in terms of the number of deaths that are caused by having this bill go on the books. And I thank the gentleman for yielding.
The gentleman is absolutely correct. Make no mistake about it, H.R. 2250 has real effects, real legal effects, and those effects weaken our protections from air pollution and harm the health of all Americans, especially our children. And no matter how many times the Republicans may want to say it, that the bill won't harm health and doesn't weaken health standards, it's just simply not accurate. So I urge support for this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I just want to make one comment. I made the comment that EPA did not quantify any health benefit from the reduction of mercury. And I might also say that in the court case, EPA tried to delay the Boiler Act rule itself. And we, in this legislation, because they lost that court case, we're simply saying we think you're right, you do need to take a little bit more time. And for that reason, I would respectfully oppose the amendment.
point of parliamentary inquiry.
Does the gentleman yield back his time?
Yes.
The gentleman yields back his time.
I just have a
Gentleman from
question
California.
about the parliamentary manner in which the debate is being handled. When I asked the other day for time to speak on the bill, I was recognized for 5 minutes, and then I asked to strike the last word so I could speak again, and it was subjected to unanimous consent request. That wasn't the request for the gentleman to be given additional 5 minutes, which I would not have objected to, but I just wonder what are the standards in terms of having a member speak twice in the debate?
The gentleman from Kentucky took the 5 minutes, claimed the 5 minutes of time that was allowed for opposition, and then asked for to move the strike to strike the last word, and claim 5 minutes that he is entitled to as a matter of a member.
So the rule is that any member can speak on the amendment and also strike the last word and have two 5-minute time frames?
Only if the first 5 minutes is claimed in time to speak in opposition.
And I asked a minute ago to speak in favor of the amendment.
Correction. The 5 minutes allocated to speak in opposition.
I asked a while ago to speak in favor of an amendment. I was told that I had to strike the last word. Can the chair explain to me why I have to strike the last word to speak in favor of an amendment? And if I spoke in favor of an amendment, would I have an opportunity to speak in striking the last word?
Clear. The proponent gets 5 minutes, and someone in opposition is provided 5 minutes. And then other members may move to strike the last word.
Only. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for that clarification.
Now, I have a parliamentary inquiry. I want to thank the gentleman from California.
Gentleman from Kentucky.
I want to thank the gentleman from California for raising this issue, make sure I understand. If our respected colleagues offer an amendment on that side and take 5 minutes to explain their amendment, then someone on our side can claim time in opposition and we get 5 minutes. Is that correct?
The opponent is entitled to 5 minutes.
And then in addition to that, if we come back later and strike the last word, we would get another 5 minutes if we desire to do so. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
on that, I request the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. For what purpose
Mr.
does
Chairman.
the gentlelady from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Edwards of Maryland.
The gentlelady from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there's a strong sense of deja vu here in the chamber today. Last week, we gave power plants the #1 source of airborne mercury free rein to spew neurotoxins and other hazardous materials into the air we breathe. Today, we repealed EPA standards, or the other day, for cement kilns, the second largest source of mercury in our air. And now here we are again proposing to preemptively block EPA from finalizing rules that limit pollution coming from the third largest mercury emitters, industrial boilers and waste incinerators. Mr. Chairman, House Republicans seem bent on eviscerating the Clean Air Act, turning back the clock on 40 years of progress in health technology, innovation, economic expansion, and job growth. Yep, job growth. Contrary to the belief of my colleagues on the other side, protecting our environment and our health doesn't stifle jobs. In fact, it saves jobs. That's because when you develop, manufacture, and implement environmental technologies, it's labor-intensive. That explains why, during the same period that the Clean Air Act kept more than 1.7 million tons of poisonous chemicals out of our lungs, it also contributed to a 207%, that's right, 207% increase in the nation's GDP. So that's why I'm offering an amendment today, to acknowledge that this bill, H.R. 2250, will block rules that have created at least 2,200 jobs. This number is a very conservative estimate. It doesn't count the good-paying jobs that would come from increased demand for the manufacture and installation of pollution control devices. It doesn't count the benefits to industry of improved worker productivity due to the 320,000 sick days that are avoided by reducing pollution under the rules. But even conservatively, it puts 2,200 Americans back to work. And so I'd like to ask my colleagues on the other side who are supporting this legislation to eviscerate the standards, at a time when we have 14 million Americans unemployed, Mr. Chairman, why in the world would you chip away at a law that has helped to stoke the American economy for 40 years and put millions of people back to work? So study after study has actually documented the connection between employment and environmental regulations. And the facts really speak for themselves. The four most heavily regulated industries, pulp and paper, refining, iron and steel, and plastics, have seen a net increase of 1.5 jobs for every $1 million they spend on complying with standards. These are also some of the biggest users of industrial boilers and incinerators that are in fact the subject of this bill. One single rule, the first phase of the Clean Air Interstate Rule, has brought 200,000 new jobs in the air pollution control industry just in the past 7 years, an average rate of 29,000 additional workers employed each year. And keep in mind, Mr. Chairman, we have a Congress, a Republican-controlled Congress, that actually hasn't created one job. So the Boilermaker workforce, a group that's directly affected by the air quality standards wiped out by this bill, actually grew 35% between 1999 and 2001, simply because more stringent pollution controls had to be installed to meet the EPA's regional nitrogen oxide reduction standards. And the U.S. environmental technologies and services industry employed 1.7 million workers in 2008 and exported some $44 billion worth of goods and services. That's a fourfold increase over 1990 when the Clean Air Act was amended. So here we have a thriving international market for these goods and services that's estimated at $700 billion, on par actually with the aerospace and pharmaceutical industries. And this Congress, this Republican Congress, actually wants to destroy that. Unbelievable. Mr. Chairman, the U.S. is recognized as a world leader in technologies like pollution monitoring and control equipment, information systems for environmental management and analysis, engineering and design. We became a leader because of the Clean Air Act, and other environmental legislation has actually challenged us to innovate. We answered the challenge. Americans answered the challenge, and as a result, our share of the global market is actually growing. In fact, we had a net trade surplus of $11 billion in environmental technologies in 2008. This is good business, Mr. Chairman. And so it's ironic that the people around the world are eager to reap rewards on superior American ingenuity, while this chamber is bringing forward a bill today that actually deprived the American people of the rewards and benefits of that ingenuity. Look, Congress can and has to do better. The American people are expecting it. In fact, we depend on it. And so here we are again, 14 million people unemployed, millions in poverty, and we could be creating jobs, and instead we're destroying them. And so I want to urge all my colleagues to actually support my amendment. And as members of this chamber, Republicans and Democrats alike, it's time for us to join together in putting the country first, and together we can get the America back to work. Thank you, Mr.
Gentlelady's time
Chairman.
has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
I move to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentlelady from Maryland's amendment would require that we adopt a finding, the finding by EPA, that its boiler and incinerator rules will create 2,200 net additional jobs. And the reason that we respectfully oppose that is that that's EPA's analysis. And from hearings and from independent groups, we do question the models used, we question the assumptions made, we question the lack of transparency in some of EPA's numbers. But more important than that, we've had the Council of Industrial Boiler Owners, who you may or may not agree with their numbers, but they say they've concluded that these rules would put at risk over 230,000 jobs. So EPA is saying, well, you're going to gain 2,200. They're saying you're going to put at risk 230,000. Then we had the American Forest and Paper Association concluded that they're putting at risk, under these new rules, over 20,000 jobs. We may be picking up 2,200, but you're going to put at risk 230,000 plus 20,000 more. And then the whole argument that this administration seems to be making a lot of is that if you issue regulations and you put additional requirements in, then you create jobs. But yet, I believe that many people would say in the history of our country, we've become a strong economic power because we've had individuals willing to invest money, to be innovative, to be free marketeers, to go out with a new product, produce it, create jobs, and that creates wealth and increases our gross domestic product. But now we seem to be having this argument that, well, if we have more regulations, we'll create more jobs. And I would say to you that EPA over this last year has been the most aggressive in recent memory. They've had about 12 or 13 major regulations, and we still find that our unemployment rate nationwide is around 9.1%. So if all these regulations are creating all these new jobs, where are they? So for the simple reason that this amendment would require us to put in a finding that this regulation will create 2,200 net additional jobs, when we have testimony, when we have witnesses, when we have documentation that the affected industries would put at risk many more thousands of jobs than would be gained, I would respectfully oppose the gentlelady from Maryland's amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek
Strike the
recognition?
last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to counter the statement that was just made. We have an estimate from the Boiler Industry Association, and they say that there's going to be a loss of jobs, and that was what was cited by my friend from Kentucky. But EPA did a very careful, rigorous 251-page economic analysis and found that the boiler rules issued in February would be expected to create over 2,000 jobs, which is the finding that the author of this amendment would have us put in the legislation. Unlike the industry studies, EPA had to follow guidelines and use a transparent analysis and put it subject to public comment. EPA determined that the boiler rules would create a net 2,200 jobs, not including jobs created to manufacture and install air pollution equipment. Of course, the boiler rules do more than just create jobs. They prevent up to 6,600 premature deaths, 4,100 non-fatal heart attacks, 42,000 cases of aggravated asthma. So that means that we're going to have a healthier workforce and a more efficient economy. EPA also found the boiler rules will provide at least $10 to $24 in health benefits for every dollar in costs. But the Council of Industrial Boiler Owners put out this study estimating the standards would lead to 338,000 to 800,000 lost jobs. Well, that was their analysis. But this analysis wildly overstated the impact of these rules by inflating the costs, ignoring the job growth resulting from investment in pollution control equipment, and ignoring the fact that business can innovate and adapt to pollution control standards. So the nonpartisan CRS, Congressional Research Service, examined the industry study, and they said the basis of the CBO study, that's the Council of Industrial Boiler Owners, was flawed. And as a result, the Congressional Research Service said little credence can be placed in their estimate of job losses. The National Association of Clean Air Agencies also reviewed the study. These are the people who implement the standards at the state and local level. They found the industry study assumptions about the number of sources that would need to make changes to comply were grossly in error. Now, even though the Council on Boiler Owners study has been thoroughly debunked, this week the Republicans circulated a dear colleague citing this study and using it to provide numbers of potential jobs at risk. And that has, of course, been the basis of the statement that has been made during today's debate. That's why this amendment is important. If the Republicans insist on referencing flawed industry studies citing job losses, then we should ensure that EPA's peer-reviewed analysis showing the potential for job growth is included in the record as well. The amendment before us does not change the underlying bill in a substantive way. It still nullifies the boiler rules and all of the health benefits these rules would provide. But the amendment before us simply ensures that the bill's text includes a simple fact. EPA estimates that the boiler rules will create jobs, not destroy them. I'd like to, at this point, ask the gentleman from Kentucky what other sources he has for his claim that there would be job losses other than the study by the Council of Industrial Boiler Owners. He said that they had their report, but this was verified by other independent sources. What other sources can verify what the CBIO states based on their study, which has been found to be flawed? I'd like to yield to the gentleman to cite any other information.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. You're accurate. The Council of Independent Boiler Owners was one. Also, information we'd received from the 5 labor unions on this issue point out some numbers, and then the other one was, what was it? AF&PA. What is AF&PA? American Forest Paper Association.
Yeah, well, that's, of course, another industry
And then we
group.
have a letter from Smuckers and a few other industries.
Okay, well, let me point out that I have, and I'll put into the record, a statement by the American Boiler Manufacturers Association. These are the company that actually design, manufacture, and supply the commercial, institutional, industrial boilers. I asked for 30 more seconds.
Is there an objection?
And they said, it is imperative that the rulemaking process already underway for over a decade goes forward unencumbered by the congressional intrusion, and that final regulations be promulgated as soon as possible to alleviate continued and further confusion and uncertainty in the marketplace and begin generating what we expect to be the new high-tech engineering and domestic manufacturing jobs in the boiler and boiler-related sectors. I submit that this is a reason to vote for this amendment, and what we've had is arguments that have come from the self-interested group based on a study that was found to be a flawed study. So I urge support for the amendment. Yield back. I yield whatever time I have.
Gentleman's time
no,
has,
I yield back the time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank goodness, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have to check our common sense at the door and rely on the EPA to be the pinnacle of common sense and reason in this body. We are asked what sources do we have, and you heard the gentleman from Kentucky name off sources. But it only takes common sense to understand that when you represent a district like mine, where many of the communities are separated by rivers and mountains, that to comply with the current EPA rules on boilers, which will require many changes and may require new gas pipelines to go to existing job sites, that you cannot accomplish that in 3 years. And if you cannot accomplish it under the current rules in 3 years, you need a bill like H.R. 2250 to make sure that you have time to be able to get the easements necessary, perhaps even through condemnation process and lawsuits, to bring in that natural gas pipeline so that your factory can stay open. And if you can't do it in 3 years and the law says you have to do it in 3 years with a possible extension of 1, and you're looking at the opportunity to keep jobs here or not be able to comply, face big fines, or move that factory to a country that wants your jobs instead of what the EPA in this country appears to want, which is our jobs to go overseas, then common sense tells you that there's no way that these strict Boiler MAC rules with a 3-year implementation time will create 2,200 net jobs. It doesn't take geniuses to figure that out. It doesn't take huge studies to figure that out. what it takes is common sense, and thank goodness we can rely on common sense. And in regard to the study or the letter by the American Boiler Manufacturers Association, a company that makes money either way, whether they get this bill passed and they sell their product overseas or they sell their product in this country, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you I was affronted by their language that was just repeated on the floor where they talked about congressional intrusion. Congressional intrusion? Does the EPA make the laws of this country, or does the Congress of the United States make the laws? I believe the Congress of the United States makes the laws of this country, and when we see something that's bad for America, it is our job to intervene and make the proper decisions for the United States of America, and it is not intrusion to do our jobs. It's not intrusion to tell the EPA we were the ones elected by the people, not the EPA, and that we are the folks who have to bring our common sense to bear and recognize, I will not yield at this time, and recognize that we have an obligation not only to the environment, but to make sure that our people have the money to be able to afford to heat their homes, to be able to afford to feed their families, and to be able to afford to seek the American dream like we had the opportunity and our parents had that opportunity. And now I would be happy to yield if the gentlelady wishes me to.
Just one question for the gentleman, if I would. I wonder if there's any time frame at all that would be acceptable for the implementation of standards that would save lives and create jobs.
And I would say to the gentlelady that the bill says that there is to be a 5-year period. It can be extended, but there has to be a conclusion at some point. The bill calls for that. But the administrator of the EPA, and unless we assume that the administrator of the EPA is just going to say nobody has to finish any time, can take a look on a case-by-case basis. And if it's going to take a little bit longer to get the natural pipe gas line into a particular factory, if it's going to take a little bit longer, I have claimed back my time, and if it's going to take a little bit longer to get the job done, then they can make a real-world decision that has real-world effects positively on jobs instead of a blanket decision that makes it impossible for businesses to be able to continue to employ people that they may have employed in this country for decades and not force those people to go overseas. And I yield back my time to the chair.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Maryland. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman?
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Maryland will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk which was pre-printed in the record as Amendment Number 1 to H.R. 2250.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois.
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Last week I offered an amendment that gave us the opportunity to demonstrate that we are aware of the impacts of our actions. We failed to take advantage of that opportunity, and today we have another chance, and I hope that we'll take it. My amendment simply includes in the findings section of the bill, creates a findings section, if you will, the scientific fact that mercury released into the ambient air from industrial boilers and waste incinerators is a potent neurotoxin that can damage the development of an infant's brain. That's what the amendment says. It inserts the following section into the findings, and it says, the Congress finds that mercury released into the ambient air from industrial boilers and waste incinerators addressed by the rules listed in Section 2B of this Act is a potent neurotoxin that can damage the development of an infant's brain. Mercury is one of the most harmful toxins in our environment. 48 tons of mercury is pumped into our air each year, threatening 1 in 6 women nationwide with dangerous levels of mercury exposure. Pregnant women, infants, and young children are most vulnerable to mercury poisoning, which harms a developing child's ability to walk, talk, read, write, and comprehend. Developing fetuses and children are especially at risk, as even low-level mercury exposure can cause adverse health effects. Up to 10% of U.S. women of childbearing age are estimated to have mercury levels high enough to put their developing children at increased risk for cognitive problems. During the debate on my mercury findings amendment last week, My friend Mr. Whitfield stated, quote, "The scientific understanding of mercury is certainly far more complicated than is reflected in this finding that asks to be included in this bill," unquote. I really don't know what he finds so complicated. The science is very straightforward. In 2000, the National Academy of Sciences issued a report on the toxic effects of mercury. Over and over, the report details the toxicity of mercury in very stark terms. Quote, "Mercury is highly toxic. Exposure to mercury can result in adverse effects in several organ systems throughout the lifespan of humans and animals. There are extensive data on the effects of mercury on the development of the brains in humans and animals," unquote. High-dose exposures can cause, it goes on to say, quote, "mental retardation, cerebral palsy, deafness, and blindness," unquote, in individuals exposed in utero, and sensory and motor impairment in exposed adults, unquote. There's another quote. "Chronic, low-dose prenatal mercury exposure from maternal consumption of fish," unquote, has been associated with impacts on attention, fine motor function, language, and verbal memory. Overall data indicate that, quote, "the developing nervous system is a sensitive target organ for low-dose mercury exposure," unquote. Quote, "Prenatal exposures interfere with the growth and the migration of neurons and have the potential to cause irreversible damage to the developing central nervous system," unquote. What is so complicated about that? The EPA industrial boiler and waste incinerator standards would reduce this major threat without undue burden to industry. The legislation we consider today will block EPA's efforts. It will send EPA back to the drawing board with new, untested, and legally vulnerable guidance for setting air pollution standards. And most troubling, it will indefinitely delay any requirement to actually reduce pollution from industrial boilers and waste incinerators. The gentleman said there has to be an end date. This legislation says there doesn't have to be an end date. My colleagues across the aisle talk a lot about not wanting to burden the next generation with debt. Where is their concern with burdening the next generation with reduced brain capacity? But even considering the very serious policy differences we have today, my amendment should be non-controversial. It would not alter the goals or the implementation of the pending legislation. It simply recognizes what scientists and the public health community tell us about mercury. We will never be able to bridge our policy differences if we can't even agree on basic facts of science. H.R. 2250 patently ignores the scientifically proven fact that mercury exposure inhibits brain development, especially in infants. If we are prepared to pass legislation that would jeopardize the health of children, we should be willing, minimally, to acknowledge the scientific fact that EPA inaction poses a serious health risk. Last week, we failed to meet our obligation to recognize the consequences of our actions. Let's not repeat this mistake. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment that simply puts a scientific fact into the legislation. I yield back.
Please, time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
It's claimed time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I certainly have great respect for the gentlelady from Illinois, and her amendment basically reads that the Congress finds that mercury released into the ambient air is a potent neurotoxin. Now, from the hearings that we've had and the discussions that we've had and the documents that we've have seen, the scientific understanding of mercury seems to be more complicated than is reflected in her amendment. Now, why do I say that? I say that because your amendment says mercury released into the ambient air. It's our understanding that methyl mercury is the neurotoxin, that mercury released into the ambient air alone is not a neurotoxin. And for that reason, we would oppose the amendment because there's a difference in methyl mercury and pure mercury. One other comment that I would make is that our legislation does provide a minimum of 5 years to comply with the new rules that EPA may come forth with. And it can go beyond that, but that would be at the total discretion of the administrator of EPA. And for that reason, we really certainly do not have any concern that it would never be set with a firm deadline. In fact, in the legislation, we say the compliance deadline shall be set, a minimum of 5 years, and the administrator may allow it to go further than that. So the argument that it would go on forever and ever, we genuinely believe is pretty remote. But for the simple reason, as I stated, about the scientific assumption, the scientific understanding of the difference in mercury, methylmercury, is the reason we would respectfully oppose the amendment of setting that in the finding. And I yield back the balance of my amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purposes, gentleman from California seek recognition?
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment simply states a scientific fact. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin that can damage the development of an infant's brain. In 2000, the National Academy of Sciences concluded that the data linking neurodevelopment effects to mercury exposure is extensive. So what do we hear from the Republican side of the aisle? Science denial. When we talked about climate change and all the impact of the greenhouse gases, they said there's no problem. Science denial. Well, let me just say that the Republican majority in the House can vote to amend the Clean Air Act, but they cannot vote to amend the laws of nature. Babies born to women exposed to mercury during pregnancy can suffer from a range of developmental and neurological abnormalities, including delayed onset of walking, delayed onset of talking, cerebral palsy, and lower neurological test scores. The National Academy of Sciences estimated each year about 60,000 children may be born in the U.S. with neurological problems that could lead to poor school performance because of exposure to mercury in utero. The effects of mercury exposure in utero are insidious and long-term. Now, why are we hearing that this isn't a scientific fact? Well, I heard a distinction of mercury, and in mercury when it's mixed with other chemicals. I think what we have here is a make up the science as you go along, but deny the science that the scientists have worked for decades establishing. Boilers and incinerators are one of the largest sources of airborne mercury pollution in the U.S. For far too long, they have been allowed to pollute unabated. And now the Republican leadership wants to nullify the rules that EPA finalized to cut emissions of mercury and other toxic air pollutions from boilers and incinerators. These rules were more than a decade late, and the Republicans say, well, let EPA start the rulemaking process all over again. Let them comply with a different standard. We're going to amend the law to provide a different standard. The different standard should not be to use the maximum available control technology, but to something that is the lowest risk of harm or cost to the industry. The Republicans keep trying to justify this bill by saying that the public health benefits of cutting mercury pollution here at home aren't significant enough to justify the costs. Well, I think we're talking about Science 101. This is not a subject to debate. Mercury is a known neurotoxin. So I ask those who support this bill, are you going to vote against what scientists say is a fact? Many of you voted earlier this year to reject the overwhelming science linking carbon pollution to climate change. I hope the Republicans are not going to do the same thing now by rejecting what every public health expert knows. Mercury is a poison. And I yield to the gentlelady from Illinois.
I would like to ask my friend, Mr. Whitfield, since we're now talking about mercury or methylmercury, if the amendment that I offered read instead of the way it does, the Congress finds that mercury released into the ambient air from industrial boilers and waste incinerators becomes a potent neurotoxin that can damage the development of an infant's brain. Because that's what happens. The mercury, you want to, pick the semantics of it, becomes methylmercury, then we could make it that way. But the importance of
Well, let me yield the time to the gentleman from Kentucky. Maybe he'll be satisfied with that change because you're stating it in a very clear, unequivocal way as a scientific finding. Would the gentleman in Kentucky be willing to agree to that statement of the issue?
Would the gentlelady repeat what she is suggesting?
Instead of saying that the mercury that's released is a potent neurotoxin, I say becomes a potent neurotoxin that can damage the development of an infant's brain, because that is the science. That's what happens.
Well, gentlemen, I yield further to the gentleman from Kentucky.
Well, let me just ask a parliamentary inquiry here. What is the parliamentary procedure if we were attempt to do something like
Well,
this?
let's worry about that later. How about the substance of that change? Will you be willing to accept that change in the findings in the legislation?
You know, we're cutting fine hairs here. What I go back to is that in EPA's own analysis, they indicated that they...
I ask unanimous consent for one additional minute.
Is there an objection? Yes. The gentleman is recognized.
They indicated that there was no quantifiable benefit from reduction of mercury. That even Ms.
Well, this amendment wouldn't change the bill. This amendment simply says that mercury has the potential to be a neurotoxin that can affect children.
Has the potential. So may I ask a parliamentary inquiry?
Does the gentleman from California yield for that purpose?
Well, let me ask if we had a unanimous consent request, could we change the amendment? I don't really want to change amendment. And as I understand it, we could.
The proponent may modify her amendment by unanimous consent.
I yield to the gentleman if he wishes to seek unanimous consent request in that regard.
Well, he objects. He objects. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, what?
He objected.
There was an objection. Well, reclaiming my time for the little moment that I have left, what we are seeing is Republicans are unwilling to say anything that has been scientifically established. They're willing to deny the science and do anything in order to serve the interests of the industry. And I think we ought to have the finding of the bill since it does not affect the functions of the bill itself. I urge support for the amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Question is on the amendment offered by the the gentlelady from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Illinois will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota wish to be recognized?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment. The gentleman has 3 amendments.
Mr. Speaker, my amendment is
will the gentleman specify the amendment at the desk?
Number 12.
Amendment number 12. Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Ellison of Minnesota.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, my amendment is very simple. What it says is that if the EPA administrator finds that the regulation creates more than 1,000 jobs, then the administrator can shorten the 5-year delay which the bill would impose. So very simply, the EPA administrator can come forward and say, look, 1,000 jobs have been created by this, and therefore this delay of 5 years would be shortened. That's all the amendment calls for. And in a time when we have such tremendous need for jobs in America, I would think that if the EPA can identify 1,000 jobs created in connection with this rule, then we should certainly be able to shorten the 5-year period of delay. And so I ask for support for this amendment because I'm sure that everybody on both sides of the aisle agrees wholeheartedly with job creation, and there has been, I believe, a false choice offered to the American people. And this false choice is very simple to describe, and that is that we can either have rules that limit emissions from boilers, or we can have jobs. But according to some people in this body, we can't have both. We can't have both clean lungs, be free of mercury, be free of other neurotoxins and contaminants, and have jobs. I argue we can have both. And if this amendment, and if the EPA administrator can demonstrate that there are jobs created here, then the 5-year period should in fact be shortened. I argue that what we need to do here is to stand for jobs. And according to the EPA, what we have seen is that this rule, underlying rule, which would be delayed by the bill, actually will create, and has been estimated to create, up to 2,200 jobs. So let's see if that's actually right. Let's see if the proposal is set forth by the rule would create jobs as the EPA administrator says it will, and if it does, we should say, let's go for it. The economic impact of the boiler regulation is exceptionally positive. The EPA's data shows that by reducing the particulate matter pollution from industrial boilers will generate net economic benefits of $22 billion to $56 billion every year. So why wouldn't we want to take full advantage of that economic activity, as all of us are concerned about jobs? Over the 40 years of success of the Clean Air Act, they've demonstrated that strong environmental protections and strong economic growth go hand in hand. They are not one versus the other, they go together. Since 1970, the Clean Air Act has reduced key pollutants by more than 70%, while at the same time the economy has grown by over 200%. So much for the claim that regulations kills jobs. That's not true. It's not right. It's inaccurate. And I say by supporting my amendment, we can see who's right. I see no reason why the Republican majority wouldn't support my amendment if they believe, as they claim, regulations, environmental regulations hurt jobs. We will see. We have a chance to see, and I want to see if people really believe what they claim, and they can demonstrate their commitment to what they argue by supporting my amendment. The benefits outweigh the projected costs of compliance by as much as 13-to-1 in this case. The misleading report from the Council of Industrial Boiler Owners claims that over 300,000 jobs are at risk. This is wrong. The National Association of Clean Air Agencies found that the Industry Commission report is based on exaggerations and omissions. The report from the industry substantially overestimates the cost of compliance regulation, and the boiler owners have ignored many benefits of the rule. Thousands of new jobs to install and operate and maintain pollution control equipment. The public health benefit, that is nearly $40 billion a year. Creating green economy jobs to make our air cleaner would create jobs throughout the supply chain. For example, installing and operating the scrubbers. So it's important that we make jobs the focus of our work here in Congress. The Republican majority has saw fit not to introduce any jobs bills during its time as a majority. Here's an opportunity to say, if you really believe that regulations kills jobs, vote for my amendment, and we'll be able to see, because the administrator, if 1,000 jobs can be generated, will be able to delay this rule. Now, if you really don't believe it and you just want to do what the boiler owners want, then of course you'll vote no. But if you really believe what you say, you'll vote yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Kentucky.
I rise to claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I respectfully oppose this amendment and ask that it be defeated. Once again, we're hearing the argument that if you have enough regulations, you're going to create jobs. And the gentleman referred to EPA's estimate that there may be a net gain of 2,200 jobs as a result of this regulation. But when you look at the Council of Industrial Boilers, when you read the documentation from labor unions, from the forest paper products, from the universities, they say there are at risk as a direct result of this regulation in excess of 280,000 jobs. So for us to be doing these minor changes if the EPA administrator finds it will create more than 1,000 jobs. The real reason, though, that we're opposed to this amendment is that under the Clean Air Act, boilers have 3 years to comply, and incinerators have 5 years to comply. We want boilers and incinerators to have a minimum of 5 years to comply. We think that that provides certainty. It certainly reflects the testimony and our concern from witnesses who testified at all of the hearings that they, in many instances, need 5 years. The EPA administrator may allow it to go longer than that if he or she chooses to do so. But I don't believe that regulation creates jobs, and I think most of the testimony would indicate that there are more jobs at risk as a direct result of these regulations, and for that reason, I would oppose this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.